It is a great honor to address the Israel Academy of Humanities and Sciences. It's an honor to give a lecture in memory of Charles Darwin, and it is an honor to be with the people of Israel at this difficult moment. But let me begin with the second notion that I feel great honored about, and that is Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin was one of the two discoverers of the theory of natural selection, the other being Alfred Russel Wallace. And they disagreed over the topic of my lecture today, namely the evolution of human rationality. Charles Darwin famously said, "Psychology will be based on a new foundation, that of the necessary acquirement of each mental power and capacity by gradation, in particular by his own mechanism of natural selection." Wallace had a different view, which I will quote at length. "Our law, our government, and our science continually require us to reason through a variety of complicated phenomena to the expected result. Even our games, such as chess, compel us to exercise all these faculties in a remarkable degree. A brain 1/2 larger than that of the gorilla would fully have sufficed for the limited mental development of the savage, and we must therefore admit that the large brain he actually possesses could never have been solely developed by any of those laws of evolution whose essence is that they lead to a degree of organization exactly proportionate to the wants of each species, never beyond these wants." As he summed up his case, natural selection could only have endowed savage man with a brain a few degrees superior to that of an ape, whereas he actually possesses one very little inferior to that of a philosopher. Where did this take him? He concluded, "A superior intelligence has guided the development of man in a definite direction and for a special purpose." Yes, when it came to the evolution of human rationality, Alfred Russel Wallace was a creationist. Now, Darwin's reaction to that was, "I hope you have not murdered too completely your own and my child." And so the puzzle that I will lay before you is, how did human rationality evolve by natural selection, if it did? Or do we have to go to Russell's alternative that God gave us our powers of rationality? So is there an alternative to creationism in explaining human rationality? I will argue that it is by narrowing the gap from both directions. Beginning with savage man, as one could say in the 19th century, or as we would today perhaps put it, for people in foraging or hunter-gatherer societies. So does savage man, as Russell put it, really only need a brain a few degrees superior to that of an ape? Well, let's take a look at how savage man actually survived in a natural environment. I'll refer, in this case, to a particular anecdote from the anthropologist Napoleon Chagnon on foraging among the Yanomamo, a hunter horticultural people living in the Amazon rainforest of Brazil and Venezuela. So he discusses how they hunt armadillos. Armadillos live several feet underground in burrows that can run for many yards and have several entries. When the Yanomamo find an active burrow, as determined by the presence around the entry of a cloud of insects found nowhere else, they set about smoking out the armadillo. The best fuel for this purpose is a crusty material from old termite nests, which burns slowly and produces an intense heat and much heavy smoke. A pile of this material is ignited at the entry of the burrow, and the smoke is fanned inside. The other entries are soon detected by the smoke rising from them, and they are sealed with dirt. The men then spread out on hands and knees, holding their ears to the ground to listen for armadillo movements in the burrow. When they hear something, they dig there until they hit the burrow, and, with luck, the animal. On one occasion, After the hunters had dug several holes, all unsuccessful, one of them ripped down a large vine, tied a knot in the end of it, and put the knotted end into the entrance. Twirling the vine between his hands, he slowly pushed it into the hole as far as it would go. As his companions put their ears to the ground, he twirled the vine, causing the knot to make a noise, and the spot was marked. He broke off the vine at the burrow entrance, pulled out the piece in the hole, and laid it on the ground along the axis of the burrow. The others dug down at the place where they had heard the knot and found the armadillo on their first attempt, asphyxiated from the smoke. Now, I submit that this involves a complex chain of hypothetical, biological, physical, chemical, and geometric reasoning. Consistent with the definition of Homo sapiens in a humorous volume called The Devil's Dictionary by Ambrose Bierce, which has an entry for our species. Man, noun, an animal so lost in rapturous contemplation of what he thinks he is as to overlook what he indubitably ought to be. His chief occupation is extermination of other animals and his own species, which, however, multiplies with such insistent rapidity as to infest the whole habitable earth and Canada. Now, as a Canadian, I'm mildly offended by this definition, but he does capture the ability of the human species to dominate and outsmart other species on the planet. So this leads to a more general alternative to creationism, the theory of the cognitive niche proposed by the late anthropologist John Tooby, a dear friend and a profound intellectual influence who died last October, and his mentor, Irv DeVore. It begins with an observation that Ambrose Bierce alludes to, which is that organisms evolve at each other's expense. Every bit of food that an organism consumes is the body part of some other organism that would just as soon keep that body part to itself. The result is that in nature there are co-evolutionary arms races where a prey animal evolves defenses against being consumed. The predator or herbivore develops further weapons to defeat the defenses, and so on, leading to greater and greater complexity. Now, this co-evolutionary arms race is played out in evolutionary time. It has a speed limit measured in generations, because that is the unit of natural selection. The idea is that the cognitive niche in nature is one in which our species overtake other organisms' fixed defenses via cause and effect reasoning, like tools, the use of tools and traps and poisons, plant preparations and drugs, ways in which we cognitively simulate the environment, manipulate it using our knowledge of how the world works to defeat other animals' defenses. We cooperate. Multiple humans can act together to bring about an action that none of them could accomplish on their own via reciprocity, trading favors, and coordinated action. For example, fanning out over a landscape and making noise to drive game to be trapped, say, at the edge of a cliff or some other isolated location, something that one person can't do, but that multiple people acting together could do. And all of these ways of hunting and gathering are played out in real time, that is, in our own mental simulations, faster than other organisms can evolve defenses, which they can only do in evolutionary time. This helps explain a number of zoologically unusual features of Homo sapiens, features that are either unique or at least hyper-developed compared to our fellow primates. An obvious one is technological know-how, the making of complex multi-part tools, multi-step preparations of plants to make them more edible and detoxify them, to multiply the availability of nutrients from meat through cooking, the extraction of drugs from plants and animal tissues. As I mentioned, we are unusual in the extent to which we cooperate with members of our species who are not genetically related to us. Many animals show forms of cooperation, but usually with their blood relatives. And of course, grammatical language, which allows us to share expertise, to coordinate actions, and to negotiate social contracts. An important feature of grammatical language, the human adaptation that I have studied in most detail, is that it is a combinatorial system. With a fixed set of resources, a finite vocabulary, and a finite set of rules for combining them, we can generate a combinatorial explosion of distinct messages, distinct thoughts. So even though the brain is finite, there is no limit to the number of new ideas that we can conceive and share. In particular, the number of sentences that we can produce, which corresponds to the number of thoughts we can share, is equal to the number of words that are possible at any position in the sentence, exponentiated by the length of the sentence. So a fixed adaptation can generate an open-ended set of ideas which we can then share. There are other zoologically unusual features of Homo sapiens. We, as Ambrose Bierce said in his definition of Homo sapiens, we infest the entire habitable Earth and Canada. Extreme omnivory, humans eat pretty much anything. We have extended childhoods. We spend most of our lives either as children or taking care of children. In humans, both the father and the mother have parental investment and expend time and resources and risk in bringing up offspring. We have complex sexuality, to put it mildly, and long-term mating, where the mother and father stay together over long periods of time. And we can be divided into cultures, where both the expertise that we acquire and the norms of coordination can be specific to a group of people forming a culture. Now, the power of the cognitive niche is that all of its features support the others, in particular language, technological know-how, and sociality. Language is a way of transmitting structured information, and a crucial property of information is that it can be duplicated without loss. It is what economists call a non-rival good. If I give you a fish, I no longer have that fish. If I teach you to fish, I still know how to fish. I haven't removed it from my brain, but I've made a copy of it in your brain. So for that reason, language inherently multiplies the benefit of know-how. It lowers the cost of acquisition because I don't have to discover everything by trial and error. As we say, I don't have to reinvent the wheel. Through language, I can acquire it from others' hard-won knowledge. And once I know it, it is useful not just to me, but it's useful as a trade good. I can offer it to others. In particular, it satisfies one of the main prerequisites to reciprocal altruism, that is the ability to confer a large benefit to others at a small cost to oneself. Or as economists would put it, it allows for powerful gains in trade, where two coordination partners can each benefit by trading something that is more valuable to the other than to the self. Language requires social cooperation. You don't have a casual conversation with your enemies. Two opposing generals in a war, two opposing coaches in a sports match don't sit down together for a conversation before a contest. Hence the English idiom to be on speaking terms, that is to be in a cooperative relationship. But language also facilitates social cooperation because we can exchange not just physical goods like food or tools, but also favors. And we can trade things not just right now, each of us give something to the other, but at widely separated times, which multiplies the opportunities for gains in trade. So the hypothesis of the cognitive niche is that the features that make humans unusual, language, know-how, sociality, and the others, co-evolved. That is, each was a selection pressure for the other. So this is an attempt to argue contra Wallace that in a human lifestyle such as that of the Yanomamo, we could not just get by with a brain a little bit larger than a gorilla, but that rather that hunter-gatherers or foragers more generally have opportunities to put to use the distinctive features of human cognition. I'd like now to narrow the gap between the foraging peoples that we evolved from and current humans by asking how rational are modern humans anyway? This is a question that recently has been on everyone's minds. Just for example, a majority of Americans between the age of 18 to 24 think that astrology is very or sort of scientific. Large proportions believe in conspiracy theories, such as that the COVID-19 vaccine actually consists of microchips that Bill Gates is trying to inject in us so that he can surveil us and control our behavior. Or that the American deep state houses a cabal of Satan-worshipping, cannibalistic pedophiles. Many people fall for fake news, like Joe Biden calls Trump supporters dregs of society, or Yoko Ono, I had an affair with Hillary Clinton in the 70s. And many people believe in various forms of paranormal woo-woo, such as possession by the devil, extrasensory perception, ghosts and spirits, witches, and spiritual energy in mountains, trees, and crystals. So the question is, if Homo sapiens is capable of rationality, why does humanity seem to be losing its mind? That is the second question that I will take up in this lecture. And it is the topic of my most recent book, Rationality, What It Is, Why It Seems Scarce, Why It Matters. It's not an easy question to answer, and I suggest that there are at least 5 reasons why humans use their complex brains in ways that result in what most of us in this room would not consider to be examples of rationality. So the first is the difference between 2 kinds of rationality, which may be called formal rationality and ecological rationality. And I'll illustrate that with 2 examples. These are classic examples from the literature in cognitive psychology on human judgment and decision-making. So here's an example from logic, goes back 60 years. Consider a deck of cards where every card has a number on one side and a letter on the other. Here is a possible rule. If a card has a D on one side, it has a 3 on the other side. Which of the following cards do you have to turn over to test whether the rule is true of these cards? There's a D, there's an F, there's a 3, and there's a 7. So why don't you ponder this question yourself. Which cards do you have to turn over to see whether the rule is true or false? Well, the experiment has been run, as I said, for 60 years with highly replicable results. The answer is that most people say you have to turn over the D card, or you have to turn over the D card and the 3 card. Now, the correct answer is you have to turn over the D card and the 7 card. Why? Well, everyone knows you have to turn over the D card because if it does not have a 3 on the other side, the rule is false. Everyone knows you don't have to turn over the F card. That's irrelevant. A lot of people say you have to turn over the 3 card, but when you think about it, that's irrelevant because the rule says if D, then 3, not if 3, then D. Thinking that you have to turn over the 3 card is the logical fallacy of affirming the consequent. But you do have to turn over the 7 card because if you turned it over and there was a D on the other side, that would falsify the rule if D, then 3. Now, the standard explanation, not very helpful because it just renames the phenomenon, but I'll present it anyway, is confirmation bias. That is, people tend to seek evidence that confirms their hypotheses. They're not so good at thinking up what would disconfirm them. Okay, here's a second example, also in the literature for more than 50 years. This is from Bayesian inference, that is the use of Bayes' rule to calibrate your degree of credence in a hypothesis according to the strength of evidence. The probability that a woman has breast cancer is 1%. If a woman has breast cancer, the probability that she tests positive is 90%, the sensitivity of the test. If a woman does not have breast cancer, the probability that she nevertheless tests positive is 9%. That's the false positive rate. A woman tests positive, what is the chance that she actually has the disease? Okay, again, why don't you ponder that for a second or two? The most popular answer in a survey of doctors is 80 to 90%. The correct answer, according to Bayes' rule, is 9%. That's right, when you see your doctor, and you have a positive test result, the doctor will might overestimate the chance you have the disease by a factor of 10. What's going on? Well, this is one of the cognitive fallacies studied by the great Israeli psychologists Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman, the phenomenon of base rate neglect. That is, people often ignore priors, in this case, the base rate of the disease in the population, the fact that only 1% of women have it in the first place, and they base their judgments on representative stereotypes. If you have cancer, you probably test positive, but people don't take into account how rare it is in the population to begin with the result that most positives are false positives. So what do these fallacies show? The famous conclusion by Kahneman and Tversky is that humans do not think in normative models of logic or probability, but we fall back on heuristic shortcuts, and as a result are highly susceptible to biases, fallacies, and cognitive illusions. Now, I think this is an important hypothesis, but I think it can be modified. Consider this twist on the logic problem. Here is a rule. If a bar patron is drinking beer, he must be over 21. You are a bouncer in a bar, and you have to enforce the rule. Which of the following do you have to check? There's a guy drinking beer. Do you have to ask for his ID card to find out how old he is? There's a guy drinking Coke. Do you have to ask for his ID card? There's a guy who's clearly over 21. Do you have to look into his cup to see what he's drinking? There's a guy who's under 21. Do you have to look into his cup to see what he's drinking? Now, everyone knows the right answer. That is, you have to find the age of the person who is drinking beer. You have to determine the beverage of the person who is under 21. But this is isomorphic to the card selection task. If D, then 3. But now, everyone is a logician. Some called the content effect. That is, people are often illogical with abstract symbols, with Ds and 3s and Xs and Ys and Ps and Qs, but they are often very logical with certain kinds of meaningful content, such as an obligation or a precaution. Let me give you a twist on the probability problem. 10 in every 1,000 women have breast cancer. Of these 10 women, 9 will test positive. Of the 990 women without cancer, about 89 will test positive. A woman tests positive, what is the chance that she actually has the disease? Well, now people can think, okay, 98 test positive, 9 of those have cancer, therefore 9 out of 98, a little less than 10%, I'll call it 9%. Now, 87% of doctors are correct. Not sure what to say about the other 13%. Even a majority of 10-year-olds get the answer right when the problem is restated in these terms. An explanation is that the crucial difference is between natural frequencies, that is, a proportion of actual instances that one can experience, versus single event probabilities. What is the probability that that person has cancer. And a probability of a single event is a bit of a strange concept. Either she has cancer or she doesn't. What does it mean to say the probability that she has it? And indeed, ordinary people have trouble with the concept of a probability of a single event, but they're much more comfortable with the concept of a proportion of events. So a slightly different conclusion about human rationality is that we use ecological rationality, not ecological in the sense of being green or hugging a tree, but in the sense of the application of rationality in a natural environment, in the environment in which it evolved. That is, people can reason about content that's relevant to their lives, mixed in with their subject matter knowledge, and they can estimate probabilities as they encounter sequences of events in their lives. What people have more trouble with is formal rationality, that is, abstract rules and formulas, affirming the consequent, Bayes' theorem, that can apply to any content. These are extraordinarily powerful inventions because they're stated in terms of P and Q and X and Y and H and D. So you can plug in any content. You don't have to be familiar with them. But these are not what we evolved with. These have to be learned and consciously deployed. Let me turn to a second source of irrationality, and that is motivated reasoning. Now, rationality is always in service of a goal. We don't call it rational if someone just says a bunch of true statements. They have to be relevant to some human purpose. And that purpose may not be objective truth. It could also be to win an argument in which the stakes matter to you. As an American journalist, Upton Sinclair, once wrote, "It is very hard to get a man to understand something when his livelihood depends on not understanding it." It may be to show how wise and moral your group is, your religion, your tribe, your political sect, and how stupid and evil the opposing one is. In the same manner, to gain status and avoid ostracism as a hero for your side. This is sometimes called the my side bias, that is, motivated reasoning in service of glorifying one's own side, and it may be the most powerful bias among the 200 that have been documented by cognitive psychologists and behavioral economists, and it is one bias that is not correlated with intelligence. That is, people with a higher IQ are just as vulnerable to the bias, and they can be even more clever at coming up for reasons for believing what they wanted to be true in the first place. Let me give you an example. So this is a potential logical syllogism, and I'd like you to judge whether it is valid, which is to say that the conclusion follows logically from the premises. And it is an American example, but I assume it will be familiar, referring to affirmative action, that is, the use of racial preferences to boost the chances of underrepresented minorities. So here's the syllogism. If college admissions are fair, then affirmative action laws are no longer necessary. College admissions are not fair. Therefore, affirmative action laws are necessary. Is this a valid syllogism? Okay. Well, it is not a valid syllogism. It commits the fallacy of denying the antecedent. That is, it goes from P implies Q to not P implies not P, therefore not Q. That does not logically follow. If you give this test to a sample of Americans, then a majority of liberals commit the fallacy, a majority of conservatives do not. Now, if you ask conservatives for the explanation, they would say, well, of course, we told you all along, liberals are illogical. But how about this syllogism? Again, an American example for which I apologize, but I assume you all understand that capital punishment in the United States is a controversy that divides the left from the right. If less severe punishments deter people from committing crime, capital punishment should not be used. Less severe punishments do not deter people from committing crime. Therefore, capital punishment should be used. Now, this is also an invalid syllogism. It commits the fallacy of denying the antecedent. Now, a majority of conservatives commit the fallacy, and the liberals are the logicians. Now, of course, what's happening in both cases is that everyone thinks that an argument is valid if it leads to a conclusion that they want to be true in the first place. We warp our logic in order to result in a conclusion that we want to be true. A third source of irrationality, which takes us back to our foraging peoples, the lifestyle in which our rationality evolved, are deeply rooted folk intuitions, kind of folk science that probably served our ancestors well in hunting for armadillos, but can get us into trouble in a modern environment. These are components of our ecological rationality, our reasoning about the world that we find ourselves in. So one of these deeply rooted intuitions is dualism, that a person has a body and a person has a mind. That is, when we deal with one another, we don't treat each other as robots or as a hunk of meat, as a wind-up doll, but we assume that the other person has beliefs and desires and consciousness just like we do. And that is essential to social interaction, but it's a short step from everyone has a body and a mind to there can be minds without bodies. And from there, you get naturally belief in spirits and souls and ghosts and an afterlife and reincarnation and ESP. Another common intuition is essentialism, that living things contain an invisible essence that gives them their form and powers. Again, a very useful intuition. It helps people distinguish compounds that may be found in different species, different tissues like poisons and drugs, which substances are combustible, which ones aren't. But from there, it's a short step to assume that disease is caused by some kind of adulteration or contamination of one's own pure essence by some foreign pollutant or contaminant. And so you get resistance to vaccines, which is as old as vaccines themselves, and you can appreciate the intuition why people resist vaccines. It does consist of taking the substance that actually makes you sick and injecting it into the tissues of your body. It's not surprising that people feel that is very icky and they just intuitively resist the concept. And genetically modified organisms, repeatedly shown to be completely safe, but just have the feel of introducing some kind of pollution into a pure food. It's why people are receptive to homeopathy, which seems to be transferring the healthful essence of a plant into the body, and other herbal remedies. And the medical quackery, the practices discovered in many cultures of curing someone by purging, bloodletting, fasting, vomiting, sweating, and the vague sense that you have to get rid of toxins. And we have an intuition of teleology. Now, we know that our own plans, our own tools, our own artifacts are designed with a purpose. From here, it's a short step to assume that the world, the universe, is designed with a purpose, and so you have beliefs in creationism, in astrology, in synchronicity, and the vague sense that everything happens for a reason. Okay, another source of irrationality is these deeply rooted folk intuitions are unlearned, and more objective truths are acquired only by trusting legitimate expertise: scientists, historians, journalists, government record-keeping agencies. Few of us really can justify our beliefs, including our true beliefs. So I have overcome whatever resistance, natural resistance there is to vaccines. I've been vaccinated against COVID 6 times. But if you ask me to explain how do the vaccines work, I would say, oh, something, something immune system, something, something antibodies, T cells, B cells. In other words, I trust the advice of the people in white coats who say that they are safe and effective. And in fact, surveys of scientific literacy show that creationists and deniers of human-made climate change are no less scientifically literate than believers. You give a test of basic facts in biology or climate science or even general science to people who believe in evolution or deny it, believe in climate change or don't, they score the same. It is not true, as most scientists think, that people who deny evolution are ignorant of the facts and therefore the proper treatment is to increase science education. That won't do anything for increasing acceptance of scientific consensus on issues like climate and evolution. What does predict why people deny these scientific beliefs? Politics. The further you are to the right, the more you deny man-made climate change, the more religious, the more you deny that humans evolved by natural selection. So these weird beliefs persist in people who don't trust the establishment, who don't trust scientists any more than they would trust anyone else, and who treat scientists as just another tribe, or journalists, or government experts and public health officials. A final piece of the irrationality puzzle is what distinction between what I call realist and mythological beliefs. Now, I've been posing the question, why do people believe outlandish fake news and conspiracy theories? The answer is, it kind of depends on what you mean by believe. People hold two kinds of beliefs. There are beliefs in what I call the reality zone. This is the physical objects around them, the other people they deal with face to face, the memory of their interactions. In this case, people treat their beliefs as testable, and they really do hold them if they're true and reject them if they're false. Is there food in the refrigerator? Is there gasoline in the car? Are the children dressed and ready to go to school? You kind of have to be oriented to reality. You have to have objectively true beliefs if you want to just survive day to day as a human being. But then we also hold beliefs about in realms that don't actually impinge on our day-to-day lives. The distant past, what happened 1,000 years ago or 5,000 years ago. The unknowable future, faraway peoples and places, remote corridors of power, what really happens in the White House or in the boardrooms of ExxonMobil. The microscopic, the cosmic, the counterfactual, the metaphysical. Now, people often have opinions in these zones which don't impinge on their day-to-day lives. Here they hold beliefs not because they're objectively correct, because for most of human history, you couldn't tell. No one knew. But people hold beliefs because they're entertaining, they're good stories, they're uplifting, they convey the right moral, they're empowering, they're morally edifying. And whether they are true or false is unknowable because until the pretty recent advent of modern science and record-keeping and objective history, no one could know the answer. So any story that makes you feel good is as good as any other story. And so it's kind of irrelevant whether it's true or false because at least in our evolutionary history and in our historical history, no one could tell. What do I mean by the mythology zone? Well, some examples are religious belief, which almost by definition are held by faith, not by objective evidence. National myths about the great martyrs and heroes who founded our great nation. Historical fiction. Does anyone really care whether Henry V gave that stirring speech that Shakespeare put in his mouth? Fake news. It's not clear how much people actually believe these stories about Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden. And conspiracy theories, where people will often say that there is an all-powerful conspiracy that is hidden by sinister, all-powerful forces that suppress all of their critics, but they distribute pamphlets, they say it on the internet, they don't seem to be worried about this conspiracy going for them. Let me give you an example, again an American example. Some of you may have heard of Pizzagate. This was a predecessor of QAnon. According to this theory, Hillary Clinton ran a child sex ring out of the basement of a pizzeria in Washington, D.C. Now, how did people who held this belief actually act on it? Well, one of them left a one-star review on Google. Said the pizza, the dough is very underbaked, and there were some funny-looking men giving suspicious looks to my son. Now, this isn't the reaction that you would have if you literally thought that children were being raped in the basement. Presumably you'd call the police. You wouldn't leave a one-star review on Google. So what does it mean to say, I believe Hillary Clinton ran a child sex ring? A translation of that belief is, I believe that Hillary Clinton is so depraved that she's capable of running a child sex ring, and who can prove that she didn't? Or I think a still more accurate translation of that belief is, Hillary, boo. That is, beliefs can be expressions of moral convictions. Now, most of us would agree with Bertrand Russell when he said, it is undesirable to believe a proposition when there is no ground whatsoever for supposing it is true. Now this, I hope, seems obvious to everyone here, but it is a deeply unintuitive, weird belief. The vast majority of humans do not agree with Bertrand Russell when it comes to beliefs in the mythology zone, separate from our immediate experience. Most people have other grounds for belief, such as does it convey the correct moral? Well, it leads to the question, how can we become more rational? And I think there are a number of answers to this. One thing, the tools of formal rationality, which are not cognitively natural, should become second nature. Rationality should be the, again, I'll use an English example, the fourth R, reading, writing, arithmetic, and rationality. I think that it's not unreasonable for probability and statistics and maybe a little bit of game theory and correlation and causation to be taught in high school. There are only so many hours in the day. What should go out? I think that if we sacrifice trigonometry in favor of probability, that would be okay. Now, I have nothing against trigonometry. I love trigonometry. But if there are only a certain number of hours in the school day, I think that Bayes' rule is more important than trigonometry. As in this satirical fake headline from a humor magazine, The Onion, the Center for Disease Control announces plan to send every U.S. household pamphlet on probabilistic thinking. It's a start. Also, norms of rationality should be promoted. We shouldn't put too much faith in what you can actually teach in school, because most things that you teach in school, as soon as the exam is over, the students forget it. So it should be more part of our everyday conversation, that people should be more aware of fallacies like thinking in stereotypes, the my-side bias, arguing against the person rather than the position. And to the extent that we can promote a norm, that should just be the way we have our conversations, our debates, our discussions. The idea of basing your belief on evidence, changing your mind when the evidence changes, should be seen as signs of strength, not weakness. Perhaps most important, institutions with their rationality-promoting rules must be safeguarded. Because as I've emphasized, a lot of rationality, a lot of the answer to the puzzle, how can we as a species be so rational when, as Tversky and Kahneman pointed out, every human is vulnerable to many fallacies and biases? The answer is we form institutions to pursue the truth. The reason that institutions can work if they're properly set up is that one person can notice and make up for another person's biases. So it's true, we all have biases, we all make errors. However, we're often much better at pointing out the other person's biases. We're not so good at pointing our own biases. Well, that means that when you get people together in a forum where they can call out each other's biases, there is some chance that the truth can emerge and that we can be collectively more rational than any of us can be individually. Again, I'll give you a concrete example. Remember the card selection task? If D, then 3. As I mentioned, when you give it to people, about 10% get it right. But if you put people in groups of 4 and you have them solve it collectively, now 70% get it right. All it takes is for one person to spot the correct answer, and they can always convince the other 3. What do I mean by rationality-promoting institutions? Well, there's Science, with its demand for empirical testing and peer review, including academies like the Israel Academy of Humanities and Sciences. There's democratic government with its checks and balances, journalism with its commitment to editing and fact-checking, the judicial system with adversarial proceedings, in theory, academia with freedom of inquiry and open debate, at least ideally, and even Wikipedia, which is remarkably accurate, not perfect, but the contributors to Wikipedia commit themselves to the pillars of Wikipedia. That includes objectivity and source checking. They have the ability to correct each other's errors. In contrast, other kinds of social media, TikTok and Instagram and Snapchat and Facebook, not so rational. Just giving people a voice, just pooling information is not enough. There have to be mechanisms that are explicitly designed to steer the community toward objectivity and truth. But it means that there is an imperative that we safeguard the credibility and objectivity of these rationality-promoting institutions. Experts should be prepared to show their work, as we say of school children. That is, instead of giving pronouncements from on high as if they are prophets, they have to explain why they're advising what they're advising. Experts should be prepared to acknowledge their own fallibility so that when they make mistakes, as they must, because none of us is infallible, they won't be sacrificing their credibility. And I think most important in today's climate, that gratuitous politicization should be avoided. Many of our journals, many of our scientific societies, at least in the United States, are falling over themselves to brand themselves as left-wing. When they do that, they should not be surprised when the right wing, and the center for that matter, blows them off. So let me just sum up the complex answer to a complex question of why, even though we are capable of rationality as a species, so often we're irrational. We use ecological rationality, naturally not formal rationality. The goal of our reasoning is not always objective truth, but maybe advancing the interests of ourselves or our group. We think in primitive folk intuitions, which can only be corrected by trusting legitimate institutions, but sometimes we mistrust those institutions. And outside our immediate experience, we feel that there can be only mythology, not objective truth. Finally, why should any of this matter? Why should we care about rationality? Well, most immediately, rationality matters to our lives. And there are a number of studies that show that people who follow the normative models of rationality, who are better at logic, better at probability, better at Bayesian reasoning, also get into fewer accidents and mishaps. As I put it, they're less likely to be schlemazzles. They have better financial, health, and economic outcomes, and they're less likely to be swindled by medical or psychic charlatans. But also, and perhaps most important, rationality drives progress. In two of my previous books, The Better Angels of Our Nature and Enlightenment Now, I showed that by a number of quantitative measures, progress, the human species has improved its condition. We have pushed back against the horsemen of the apocalypse, the scourges that have immiserated humans for as long as we've been a species. We have reduced the toll from famine, from extreme poverty, from child mortality, and yes, even from war, something to keep in mind even in these dark times. The rate of deaths from war has increased in the last couple of years. This is the data point from 2023. But still, we're at much lower levels than we were in the 80s, the 70s, the 60s, or the 50s. When I present these, that is, longevity, peace, prosperity, safety, quality of life have all increased over time when they are measured quantitatively instead of just assessed by the worst thing you can remember from the news that morning. This leads to a frequently asked question. do you believe in progress? My answer is no. To quote the comedian or the humorist Fran Lebowitz, I don't believe in anything that you have to believe in. Progress comes from deploying rationality to improve human flourishing. If we continue to apply rationality to make our lives better, progress can continue. If we don't, it may not. And I'll conclude just by reading the last few sentences from my book, Rationality. Our ability to eke increments of well-being out of a pitiless world and to be good to others despite our flawed nature depends on grasping impartial principles that transcend our parochial experience. We are a species that has been endowed with an elementary faculty of reasoning and that has discovered formulas and institutions that magnify its scope. They awaken us to ideas and expose us to realities that confound our intuitions, but are true for all that. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
As you saw, I believe in the rationality of orthopedic experts. But,
So, we have a question and answer?
yes. You might want to be here. So, first of all, thank you so much. It was magnificent in a rational way. We have a few minutes for brief questions. There are rules. Rule number one, and they're very rational. Rule number one question per individual. Rule number two, brief questions. Rule number three, the person who asks the question does not deliver the Darwin lecture. So I'll go from this side, question number one. I take it from here, question number two. Yeah, I don't see well because of that, so. Yeah, the person who asked the question should, although I know that person, should get a microphone and.
Thank you.
Yes, microphone.
Yeah, can you hear me? So first of all, thank you for the talk. I wanted to ask, I would love the entire world to become more rational as you suggest, but it seems as if there are some establishments, either in the industry or in government, and I might speak from bitter experience, that have an incentive to keep us less rational than we ought to be. Yeah. So is there a way to fight that as well, and do you consider that in your book as well?
No, it is a vital question, and no institution can do it perfectly or will do it by default automatically. We have to apply rationality to the design of our institutions and reform our institutions when their goals are not aligned with the goals of objective truth deployed to make everyone better off. So in a good democracy, in a good scientific society, in a good university, the rules of the university, of the government, of the institution have to be examined rationally. Yeah.
Thank you. Another question there, please. Adi? Yeah. To the microphone, please. Hardly. You are a physicist, you know you have to press the button.
But I have a loud voice to compensate for that.
You should go into the recording.
Okay.
And so, to the streaming audience, yes.
I want to ask, do you see any role that irrationality may play in evolution, that it may do some good to the evolution of humankind?
Well, and do you mean our past biological evolution? Or
no, even at present, does irrationality play any positive evolutionary role?
Oh, irrationality. There are areas in which irrationality can advance the interests of of an agent in a competitive situation. Thomas Schelling, the great political scientist, outlined the idea of paradoxical tactics. That is, in certain situations of bargaining or competition, the advantage can go to the irrational party, the one who walks away from a negotiation, who doesn't give up, say, in a game of chicken, where you have two teenagers who drive at each other at high speed, and the one who swerves first loses. Well, if you sacrifice choice, rationality, action by locking your steering wheel, the other guy has to get out of the way. Now, the problem is that if both agents are irrational in the same way at the same time, then they're worse off. So you need a kind of hyper-rationality, not to play that game, or to change the rules of that game. And it could be that there are certain emotional, motivational features, not just of humans, but of other organisms, in competitive situations that are not rational by the lights of what's best for the species, but simply gives a local advantage in the competition among individuals. Mm-hmm. And I suspect a lot of irrationality can be explained that way. Fortunately, because we also have cognitive processes that can analyze situations, we can step back and reflect and say, well, this irrational impulse, we can understand why it evolved, but it's not very good for us. Let's figure out how to minimize it, such as the rule of law, such as traffic laws, such as science and other institutions.
I would like to encourage the younger part of nothing against you personally, the younger part, not against you as well, the younger part in the audience. I think we have high school students here. That's your chance to be rational. Just a minute, I'm still here. No? Okay. Please say your name.
Hi, Debbie
Those,
it would be 4.
Yeah. No. We know it works.
תפעילי ותחכי 2 שניות.
It worked a second ago.
הנה, עכשיו עובד.
Okay, it works?
Yes.
Okay. Debbie Fass-Weitzman Institute. So if I understood you correctly, you said that because currently people's position on climate change, vaccination, et cetera, doesn't correlate with their level of science education, that there's no point in increasing science education. Maybe
I wouldn't say that.
Okay.
No.
It sounded like what you were saying.
No,
but I wanted to ask.
It won't make people believe, it won't, by itself, will not make people believe in evolution.
Okay. Yeah. So I wanted to ask, though, that you could possibly switch the mechanism by which people choose a viewpoint on those issues. For example, you mentioned that in your card situation, that once a rational person realizes that they're able to convince their peers, right? Yeah. So instead of having to rely on authority, right, if there are enough people who are scientifically educated in a community, right, then you can rely on your friends, your family, your peers, rather than a distant authority. Anyway, so I just wanted to raise the possibility of switching a mechanism for decision-making by increasing scientific literacy.
That's exactly right. There can be a kind of a herd immunity to misinformation. Although it also depends on the makeup of the peers. It has to be people that the individual trusts and whose opinions he or she is likely to accept. But it does. But you're right that it opens the door to increasing acceptance of scientific consensus by having influential people of that political coalition sign on to the best scientific understanding. So if you had, say, again, an American example where climate change is quite polarized along political lines, instead of having Al Gore make the case for man-made climate change, he being a Democratic vice president and presidential candidate, if you could find a Republican, someone on the right, to explain climate change, that fact itself would probably change more minds. Likewise, in the religious context of evolution, maybe not literal biblical literalism, that is, the world was created in exactly 6 days. But a more religious mindset, if there are people who say, well, there's nothing incompatible with Darwin's theory of evolution and a belief in God, maybe God set up the laws of the universe so that natural selection would kick into gear, then you can be religious and believe in evolution at the same time. That's probably a more effective way of spreading belief in evolution than just teaching it. Because even when you teach it, what often happens is students will kind of understand the theory, but just not accept it. So it does crucially depend on these social factors.
Yes, please.
Thank you. I'll try to advocate for irrationality a little bit. It's beneficial for society, maybe. So I'm wondering...
Could you kindly speak slower? That's irrational for us to
So I'm wondering if it may be... Oh, okay. I'm wondering if it can be beneficial for society to have heterogeneity in the way we form beliefs. So, I mean, the world is weird and it's difficult to understand what's going on. Maybe it's useful to have some people that believe in ESP because there's a very small chance that it may be actually true. Mm-hmm. And maybe we can see evidence for this in the case of fringe science that's becomes mainstream afterwards. So maybe we don't want to leave a little bit of weirdness in the way that people think can actually help.
No, that's absolutely true, and that's why freedom of speech and academic freedom are so important. Namely, even if, and why the government censorship, the campaign to eliminate misinformation can actually be dangerous. Most of the time, fringe beliefs are nonsense. Sometimes they're true, and we won't know whether they're true unless people can voice them and we can evaluate them. So that's why the criterion for who should be allowed to say something should not be, is it rational, is it true? Because when we judge, is it rational, is it true, we might be wrong. Probably not, but often enough, and it's possible, that freedom of speech must be safeguarded. So yes, you've just articulated a reason why freedom of speech is so important.
So we're going to conclude with two brief questions. So number one.
Hello.
Please present yourself.
My name is Alicia. I'm learning in high school. And I wanted to ask, if we assume that our brains developed in an evolutionary process, therefore also our irrational and also our rational features developed in an evolutionary process. So what is the crucial difference between our irrational and rational features? Why do you think that specifically the rational features that exactly like the irrational features developed in an evolutionary process, why do you think they are better?
Yes, well, it's rationality that tells us, that allows us to conclude that they're better, given our goals. So if you agree that it's better to be alive than dead, and healthy than sick, and well-fed than hungry, and safe than in danger, and those are evolutionarily intelligible goals, then we can think which features of our behavior result in more of that or less than that, and we can judge our own evolved features in terms of whether they bring about our goals. So we can say, yeah, people like to kill each other out of revenge, and they may exploit each other sexually. They might spread all kinds of myths and illusions and fallacies, like that vaccines are dangerous. But since we can judge using our rational faculties that those features of human nature aren't making us any better off, we can invent institutions and norms and laws that amplify the beneficial parts of human nature that evolved and try to control the disadvantageous parts. That's why we have laws, that's why we have science, because human nature left to itself won't make us better off, won't make us healthier and happier.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you again, but you stay here because there is some thing that you're going to get as a sort of a souvenir. Professor L, please.
I'm not sure we did this right last year, so now I think we'll walk in front of the table and do this properly. And since I won't have the microphone in front of me, so I'd like to thank you personally for a fascinating lecture. And we have, as Yadin said, a souvenir for you.
Yeah, be careful because last time we lost an academy member here.
Charles Darwin.
No, it's this one. Is that right? Thank you. Thank you, Professor. Thank you. Thanks to all of you for coming and for listening and for your questions.